Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the last session of our third and last virtual job market workshop. We're excited to have all of you here. I'm sure by now you've put in a lot of time submitting applications and you're now waiting to hear back about interviews, or depending on which markets you were targeting, some of you may already be having flyouts or even offers. So in the last session, we covered flyouts, and even though offers feel like they might be really far away, they will be here before you know it. And it's helpful to think about how that stage should be navigated. So we're very happy to have four excellent speakers to talk about that stage of the job market. We have Anastasia Fedek, an assistant professor at UC Berkeley. We have Bart Lipman, a professor at Boston University, Will Wheeler, an economist at USCPA, and Chris Galinsky, manager of applied science at Uber. So here's how this session will work. First, each of our speakers will take about 15 minutes presenting their thoughts. Then we'll have up to 45 minutes for questions and answers, and that portion I will moderate. So as the speakers talk, if any questions pop up, please write them down and you'll be able to ask them at the Q&A. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Anastasia.
Hi, well, thank you for coming to this very last one. I know that offers are probably not the main thing on everybody's mind right now. We're still in the stage of getting the interviews, so this is a little bit looking ahead, but hopefully this will come in handy in a couple of months' time. So I'm just gonna kind of talk, I guess, in general about the timeline, sort of what happens as you get your first offer, what happens as you possibly get multiple offers, how the timing of that might work out, as well as then if you do get multiple offers, how you navigate that, how do you make up your decision, and what kind of factors might go into that, what things to look out for. So to start, maybe we can sort of fast forward to the first offer stage, and that can come kind of at any time, just as you're probably seeing these weeks with the interviews. Different schools have very different formats for when they do things. So some schools may have already started making their interview calls, and some schools are going to take until like mid-December, even if they all had sort of the same deadline for the application. So same thing with offers. Some schools literally make an offer the day after you fly out. So they see you, they like you, they know they want to get you, and they make you an offer straight away. Other schools, including where I'm at Berkeley, have kind of a very standardized procedure where we have to see everybody before we can talk about anybody. So then you kind of wait until the last fly out, and then everybody gets together and then sort of decide in the whole group whom we like. So even if you're the most brilliant candidate we've ever seen and sort of immediately know that we're going to want to hire you after your flyout, if your flyout was one of the first, we're just not going to be able to make that offer and act that quickly until we've seen everybody. So there is substantial variation across schools, and consequently, across candidates, there will be substantial variation when you personally might get your first offer. So just like with the interviews, sort of don't stress too early. Same with the offers. If you're not getting them right away after the flyouts, that usually doesn't mean that the schools don't want to hire you. That just means that they haven't made up their mind yet, and then they may or may not want to hire you when they do. So that's how like the first offer can come kind of at various times. And of course, it is more sort of has a bigger positive impact, I guess, on your well-being if you happen to get lucky with one of those schools that makes an offer relatively quickly. Then you at least know, right, your sort of lower bound, you know, that you have that offer. Maybe it's great, maybe it's not, even if it's not your favorite sort of hoped for offer, is still an offer, and you know that you have kind of at least that. So that's really helpful. I guess one exception is if it's an exploding offer, that can actually add more stress than the amount of stress it relieves, because now you're making a decision between whether, you know, this sort of current guaranteed offer is better than your option value of continuing to see other schools. And I've seen kind of people make that decision in different ways. We've also kind of on our recruiting side with our lengthy and sort of standardized process where we wait until we've seen everybody and then deliberate to make offers. We've also had it happen that, there would be candidates that likely want to hire, but we cannot formally make up our minds yet, or even really discuss, and they have an exploding offer. So then that definitely does sort of limit the other schools, but that's okay, and things will kind of most likely equilibrate in the longer term. So I've also seen it happen that a person might take their exploding offer, and then another school that wanted them might make them an offer in the next year or two, and they can move. So it's an inefficiency introduced into the system with exploding offers, unfortunately, but it's an inefficiency that often kind of can get corrected in the longer term. So there's no kind of right or wrong decision on that front, but it's perhaps less kind of stressful than it might seem because you're not making these decisions for life. You're making them for the next couple of years, and then things might change. So I guess the other thing that comes with the dispersion in the timing of offers is that even if you don't have an exploding offer, and if you have an offer with a very reasonable deadline, if you happen to get it early in the market, and other schools that you're considering are making offers much later, that can still create a wedge in terms of when you have to decide on your earlier offers and when you're actually going to see your later offers. In those cases, if those earlier offers were not exploding offers, it is likely that they would be amenable to extending even with exploding offers. It's worth trying, but they're usually doing it for a reason. With the regular offers, probably even more likely that they may extend your deadline within some reasonable parameters. If you sort of explain, I'm waiting for this like one or two other schools, they may or may not want to hire me. If they do, then I will probably go there. But if they don't, you are my favorite sort of choice outside of that. Would you consider extending the deadline by X amount so that I hear from those specific schools? Of course, only do that if the school that you're requesting the extension from is actually going to be your top choice, barring getting one or two other offers. So if you're already unlikely to go there, then there's a trade-off between sort of holding onto an offer for your kind of security as a backup and not letting that offer go to other students. So just be mindful of others on the market as you are waiting to hear back from your top choice. It's likely that the reason you're waiting is that they made an offer to their top choice and are waiting for them to decline. So kind of anything you can do on your end to help the market clear more quickly, it's an improvement in overall welfare. So if you have an offer that you're not going to accept, then it's good to decline that straight away. Same with flyouts. So as you get your first offer, depending on when that comes, if that comes relatively early, it's possible that you're still going through the flyout stage and have a couple of flyouts left. And I guess when I was in the market, received kind of different advice from different people, including kind of my advisors, in terms of what the norm is with flyouts that may be dominated by an offer that you already have. There is a case to be made that flyouts also give you an opportunity to meet people, so you still want to kind of go and do that. But in reality, schools are investing a lot in recruiting, so it is costly for them to fly you out when maybe they could go and kind of give a late flyout to a backup candidate on their list. So you should let them know, basically, let them know that you got an offer from this place. For whatever reasons, usually people try to cite, I guess, personal reasons rather than saying it's a better school. But for whatever polite reasons you can state, you're most likely to take this offer that you already have. You do not want to waste their time. So if they would like to give your spot to somebody else, they can. That said, you'd be delighted to come and give a seminar with now an understanding that this is not a recruiting seminar, but a regular seminar. In practice, at least in my experience, there were a couple sort of schools whom I sent that kind of message. Nobody took me up on an immediate seminar. They said, we'll maybe invite you in some other year. So it does seem like they appreciated the option of just canceling a job market seminar when when it was clear that you would not end up taking the offer, even if you received it. So that kind of, those are, I guess, the etiquette things. So let the schools know, and let the let kind of dominated offers know as well. And of course, it's a smallish profession, right? We do all end up seeing each other and knowing each other. So anything polite that you can do is usually good in the long term. So if you're not kind of losing from it and you're letting somebody else gain, that's going to be probably positive for you as well. So I guess having said all of that on kind of navigating the timing of the offers, I want to talk about sort of how to actually decide, I guess, between multiple offers that don't have a clear ordering already. So not the case that one of the offers is dominated by the other, but you're actually sort of considering two offers that are similarly attractive. How do you actually decide between them? And I think there are kind of multiple factors that go into that, both kind of professional and personal. Of course, there may be some constraints. If you have sort of a spouse that's geographically constrained, or kind of a family reason, maybe family illness that you need to be kind of nearby. So barring those constraints, which again can make an offer sort of dominating, even if it weren't based on the department, if sort of you're kind of open to various possibilities, I do highly recommend going on a visit to those places with now kind of a much calmer state of mind of not doing a fly out, but kind of examining the department. Also examining just the place to live, because most likely at the flyout you focused on sort of selling yourself. Most of your, pretty much all of the conversations are going to be about your work, like 80% of them about your job market paper, and the remaining about maybe some additional work. You usually are not kind of at the flyout stage talking about what it's like to live in that place and what are the dynamics in the department and kind of all the things that may make life more or less pleasant for yourself. So the campus visit is a chance to do that. So you can go, you can explore the place, and basically like see what the social environment in the department is like, right? So you can go out that same sort of lunch and dinner, but again, without the pressure of the fly out. Just kind of imagine, right? These are going to be your colleagues. Is that going to be something you'll enjoy for the years to come? And then also kind of just spend a little bit more time. So maybe, right, you're going to have, in like vast majority, almost all cases, you're going to have fewer offers than flyouts. You can afford to spend more time in each place, maybe kind of 2 or even 3 days, probably 2 is enough, in each place instead of that one kind of quick fly out. So spend a day just exploring the city, exploring kind of the living environment, anything that might matter to you personally, because with offers that are otherwise equal, you are going to be more productive in a place that you actually where you actually enjoy being, than in a place that you don't like outside as soon as you step outside of your department. This kind of stage where you are sort of exploring, deciding between the offers is also a good time to connect back to your advisors, whom you should be keeping kind of up to date at all phases of the job market. So right now, as you're getting interviews, they should know what interviews you're getting or not getting, and may kind of be able to help and step in and reach out to schools that maybe are in the right range but overlooked you for some reason. As you're getting flyouts, same thing. Your advisors should be kept kind of real time up to date about what is or is not converting. And then kind of at the offer stage, you need to update them, because as you're getting those offers, they have been in the profession for a lot longer, so they may have additional insight that you will not be able to glean from just 2 days in the department and the city. So if there's any reason that they think the department is maybe like, more, the trajectory is different, right? So either more up and coming or for whatever reason declining than it may look like from just kind of seeing the current state of the department. That's something your advisors can kind of opine on. If there are any issues within the department that you might, again, are not going to be visible as you're visiting, but that may be relevant for you personally, right? For example, if there are kind of some issues between different economic fields, and you're being hired by the labor group at after some a lot of sort of kind of fighting with some other group, right? And kind of that's something that maybe is worth knowing if that affects, for example, the likelihood of having more colleagues hired in your field in the future, right? So we're kind of how sort of the dynamics in the department are going to feel like to you. So those kinds of things are things that your advisors can pitch in on. Again, just kind of keep them updated on the offers, and they'll probably have preferences. So even if you're having two departments that are like equally ranked and that similar, your advisors may for some reason say like you should definitely go to department A, and then you ask them why, and they can give you their reasoning, and you can sort of take it and do with it what you want, right? So at the end, it really needs to be your own decision. You're just trying to gather maximal information from those who may have some additional information. Some other things that are going to be important, I guess, like in terms of the actual quality of the academic offer itself. All right, so obviously there is kind of who is in the department and the quality of the department and the research that's going out of the department. Including kind of the field match. So the department is sort of brilliant in development, but you're doing finance, right? That's going to be less relevant for you than if the department has a really strong finance group. So kind of the field match interacted with sort of the research kind of output match. But beyond that, kind of additional things are things like the resources to be able to do your own research, both in terms of the research resources, right? So things like research budget, labs, if you're doing experimental stuff, data, if you're doing empirical stuff. So depending on what you're doing, does it have the resources that are going to be most helpful for you to be able to do your research, but also the teaching load. So that goes inversely with the time resource for research. So departments may vary, even kind of similarly ranked, otherwise very similar departments may have slight variances in terms of the teaching load that you get, especially in the first years. So most schools give you a lighter load when you start, and then it varies how long that lasts for. That can be 1 year, or that can be 3 years. So that's going to matter as kind of those first couple of years as you're adjusting and trying to publish chapters for your dissertation, trying to do new work. Having kind of less teaching load is definitely going to be helpful. So that's kind of a consideration on which you'll compare departments. Other things like salary considerations are probably going to only really kind of be large considerations if you're deciding between qualitatively different types of offers, rather than if you're deciding between two finance groups and business schools. They're going to be quite similar if you're deciding between similar sort of entities, and the offers are most likely going to be fairly standardized at that kind of starting stage. Now, if you're deciding between qualitatively different institutions, that's where the salary differentials can potentially be much larger, and then it starts to play into your decision making, and of course your personal situation in terms of the marginal value that you receive from marginal income at various levels of total income. And I guess one kind of last thing that I think next speakers will touch on a lot more, but in that navigating stage, I talked almost entirely about sort of observing characteristics and making decisions between multiple offers. I didn't really touch on kind of endogenously trying to change any of the characteristics or the negotiation process. That's just because I personally don't have much experience with that. I decided between my offers and I sort of went with it. Those may be, some slight kind of adjustment, right? If some places had a higher research budget, maybe got kind of brought up to match. But otherwise, they'll have that much experience on it. I think some of our other speakers may be able to speak to that more. But kind of, I think in that process, as well as in the general decision process, it's just important to not overlook any characteristics. So even at times when maybe kind of what you really care about is not negotiable, maybe some other things that you care about, but that for the school are sort of less impactful. Those can be maybe more readily matched. So just kind of, I guess one thing I did at some point, while like at that stage of navigating offers, was just kind of jot down all the characteristics that I cared, from teaching load to research budget to tenure clock length, right? Like all of those various features that are going to potentially impact your well-being while being in that position, and then kind of across the offers that that were sort of, right, kind of comparable in my mind, so not dominated by anything else. I just jotted down, what that school had on each characteristic, and then looked at sort of the aggregate vector, and that way it kind of wasn't forgetting something that I cared about but wasn't thinking about it. And with that, I'll pass it on to our next speaker.
Thanks so much, Anastasia. Next up, we have Bart Livman.
Thanks. So I have to say there was a lot of great information that Anastasia just gave. I just wanted to have one, sort of personal bit of advice in terms of, this is something I tell all my students. I told my son when he had to make big decisions, is kind of the advice I give everybody. I think it's often true that you kind of know in your heart what the decision is before it reaches your brain. And I tell people the thing to do is go through, the process you're going to go through, and Asia described it extremely well in terms of gathering information and looking at it, analyzing it. And then what I always do is make your decision, don't act on it, go to bed, and see how you feel when you wake up in the morning. And if when you wake up in the morning,
no, Bart, we lost you.
can you hear me now?
Yeah. I wonder
Okay.
if you don't have slides, maybe it's best if you turn your video off. I think the last thing we heard is if you wake up in the morning.
If you hopefully you wake up in the morning.
Hopefully you wake up in the morning. Or maybe it was when you wake up in the morning.
Good. Okay. Should I turn off the video? Do you think that would
maybe
help?
let's try that, because it's still
Right,
lagging a bit.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, so now I don't see myself, which is very confusing. But okay. So what I was trying to say is, if when you wake up in the morning, you have a sinking feeling in your stomach, like, oh hell, what did I do? Then that means you made the wrong decision. And it's important not to confuse that with nervousness, because it's a big decision. You're going to be a bit nervous. But the key is, do you have that sense of, oh crap, or do you have that sense of, yes, this is exciting, and I'm nervous, but it's exciting. So that's just one bit of advice. So let me turn to what I was planning to really talk about. So I was a department chair for 8 years and negotiated a lot of offers over that time with people. And also because when people were negotiating, they would bring me their other offers. I saw quite a lot of offer letters over that period of time. So that's, I think, my comparative advantage in this thing, is to talk about academic offers and bargaining over them. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So sort of echoing something Anastasia said, there's a huge amount of variation out there. And so I'm going to try to give you big picture things, but don't be shocked if you come across something completely different from what I've described, because it will vary. So briefly, what are the elements that you're going to see in an offer? Most of this won't be a surprise. Obviously, salary is going to be in there. As again, exactly as Anastasia said, there's huge variations in salary between, say, the finance group at Stanford Business School versus an economics department in a small liberal arts college, or a small state university or something like that. Enormous variation. Even within, a rank, there's much less variation, but there still can be variation. As you probably know, we have this really bizarre thing in the US where we quote salaries in terms of 9-month salaries. You get paid that money over 12 months, but we call it a 9-month salary. What that opens up is the other thing that I think is peculiarly US-based phenomenon, which is summer salary. So because you're being paid for 9 months, the question is, do you get money in the other months? And for some, again, I have no idea where this ever came from, but we quote summer salary as 2 additional months. So in other words, if they tell you you're going to get summer salary, what they're telling you is that year you will get an additional 2/9 of your salary. Again, this varies hugely across institutions. Finance department of a top business school, they're going to get summer money every year on top of the already larger salary. Most non-business school economics departments in the US, you're going to maybe get it for a year, maybe 2 years, something like that. So that's a big chunk of money to pay attention to. Teaching loads, as Anastasia mentioned, especially in terms of whether you're going to get a course reduction and how much of a course reduction at the beginning and for how long. That's a big element. There's a lot of variation in that across universities, but within comparably ranked universities, it's going to be fairly similar. You can see differences, but they're going to be more similar. Another thing is research support, which again, Anastasia made a reference to. This can come in a wide range of forms. So some places will do something like you get a pot of money at the beginning, could be $20,000, let's say, and you get that money to use for research expenses, and you spend it, over whatever period of time you choose to spend it, and when it's gone, it's gone. Other places are going to say you get an annual research account of $5,000 or $10,000 or something like that, and that's promised to you, in perpetuity or for at least 3 years. Or some places will combine these things. Some places will also, on top of the funds, offer you a research assistant for a certain amount of time. 1 semester of a research assistant, each of the first 2 years or something like that. Other places will say, yes, you can hire a research assistant, but it's going to have to come out of that pot of money. So there's a lot of different ways this can be done, and I've seen a lot of different kinds of offers on that dimension. If like me, you're a theorist, the research assistant thing may be totally valueless, and in that case, you may want to negotiate, and I'll get to negotiating in a second. But if you're somebody that does data work, of course, that's a really important thing to be looking at. There's a wide range of other things. Something that's kind of popping up a lot in like the top 30 or 40 departments in the US these days is something like a junior sabbatical. So at BU, for example, it's a university policy that all junior faculty get a semester off in, I think it's the 4th year. I've kind of lost track. I stepped down as chair a couple of years ago and have tried to forget everything. So that's one detail I don't remember too well anymore. But anyway, so those, and there's still other things that could be part of an offer in principle, but that kind of gives you the main element. One thing Anastasia mentioned that I forgot to write down, the tenure line. The exactly how long is the tenure clock? What are the various things you have to do along the way? For example, private business schools are often a 9-year clock. So so that's a long time till you get tenure. Other places could have clocks as short as 5 or 6 years. That makes a big difference in terms of the expectations and what you've got to do and when you're going to, hit job security. Okay, so those are kind of the big picture items. So now let's turn to bargaining. So the question that I think everybody asks is, can I bargain? And the answer is sure, but you have to have something to bargain with. So I've been in the embarrassing position sometimes if somebody has only our offer and they want to bargain, and I have to tell them, I would love to give you more money. I want you to come to my university. I think you're a great person and I would love to have you as a colleague. I am not going to be able to convince my dean to just hand you more money. They want to have you come too, but they have budget constraints at the end of the day. It's like, you may love the person you buy groceries from, but you're not going to just offer them more money for the groceries just out of the blue. So, I mean, we're economists. We understand these things. It's not hostility. It's just reality. So what that means is, unless you're really going to decide to be unemployed rather than take their offer, if that's the only offer, you really don't have much room to bargain. If you have multiple offers, that's where bargaining can come into play. And Anastasia alluded to this a bit as well. Here, a tricky issue is, to what extent are parts of the offer fungible? And what I mean by that is, for example, suppose you're a theorist and therefore don't really need an RA, and they offer you an RA. You might say, well, take away the RA and put more money in my research account. And that might or might not be feasible. Universities can be extraordinarily bureaucratic, and they're, each different piece of the offer is being drawn from a different budget. And it may or may not be that they can move things, that you're talking about items coming out of the same budget. And if they're coming out of different budgets, there may be no ability for the university to move across those things. So just kind of bear that in mind. That said, the more information you can give the person you're negotiating with about your preferences and where you see gains by shifting things across categories, the more likely it is that they can reach a change that would make you and them both better off. So I encourage you to be open about your preferences with the department chair, whoever it is you're negotiating with. What else? Oh, the other thing that's important to understand. It's really tempting when you have multiple offers to say, let me tell this one to increase their offer to match that one, and then this one to increase to match that, and then try to get some, and then try to keep running around the circle and have a bidding war. Universities don't tend to understand game theory, but they do understand Bertrand competition, and they do understand that a bidding war is not a good thing for them. And so there is no way, almost no, well, if you're a superstar, maybe you can get that going. But if you're a normal person, like I suspect most of us in this call, you're not going to be able to get that going. I hate to tell you. Typically, when I was a department chair, I would have to go to the dean to get an improvement. And there's only so many times I could go to the dean for a change. And typically that number was 1. So you should bear in mind, you're going to be, you could probably get 1 round of improvement. You're almost certainly not going to be able to get more. How do you get that improvement, and how do you get the improvement you want? The advice I would give you is the following. Look at the offers that you have. Ask yourself realistically what improvement in your offer is going to make is not going to be out of line with the other offers, and is going to bring you to a point where you can say, yes, I will accept this. If you go to a department and you say, well, I would really like more money, that may or may not work. If you go to a department and say, well, if you can increase the salary by $5,000 and increase my research budget by $2,000, I will accept the offer, because that will bring it to beat this other offer in my mind, and I would accept that offer. If you could say that, that has a huge effect, because then the department chair goes to the dean and says, they'll accept if we do this. And the dean knows it's not just more bargaining, it's not a waste of the dean's time. and they're gonna be more likely to work on it. So I strongly encourage you to think about what would be the thing that would nail this down for you, and to convey that to whoever you're negotiating with. The last thing I would say is going to echo something else Anastasia said, which is you got to be honest. You got to be. You don't have to tell them everything, but you got to be honest. And hopefully, you're going to have a long career. You're going to interact with people in different departments over a long period of time. Speaking personally, I ended up moving to departments that years previously I had turned down. You don't want to be burning your bridges when you turn somebody down. If you tell somebody, if you make this change in the offer, I'll come, and they make the change in the offer and you don't go, you're really kind of burning your bridges. And that I strongly recommend not doing that. And with that, I think I'm done. So I'll turn over to the next person.
Thank you so much, Bart. Next up, we have Will Wheeler from the US EPA.
Thanks, Tatiana. So before I start, if you've ever seen a federal employee give a presentation, they always disclaim like this is not the views of the EPA or anything. So there's actually really strict rules about fundraising on government time. So I just want to let everyone know I'm on leave and I'm using my private computer. So I'm still very happy to do this. I have plenty of leave, but if an auditor watches the recording or something. So this was really great advice from Anastasia and Bart. I'm not going to have that much to add about negotiation and things like that. So I thought it might be useful for me to talk a little about how government economists are hired. And last I looked, there was something like 2,000 PhD economists in the federal government in the U.S. We do, a ton of different agencies, lots of different work, many different mixes of research and policy work. So it's really hard to explain all of it. But and I think the biggest employer of PhD economists is the Federal Reserve Board. I think they have about 400, and then the Departments of Treasury and Commerce and Agriculture all have a lot of PhD economists. But even within those agencies, they have sub-agencies that have different job descriptions. So it's possible that an economist job would be advertised through Joe, like I know my office, and a lot of places, the Fed and Treasury, with places with a large mass of economists, will also advertise in Joe, but not all of them. But I think none of us can just solicit resume CVs through Joe and then hire you. We have to go through another process. For the vast majority of us, it's going to be a site called USA Jobs. And all of our jobs have to be advertised there as well. And again, places with a lot of economists, like my office, has beaten HR into submission, and we've trained them to, post our USA Jobs ad, at a time that works for the Joe cycle, and other places will do that also. But you can find Joe USA Job ads all throughout the year. And I think it's important, to mention this, because there is a lot of information about your job in there. And again, across the federal government, there's several systems, but you're generally to be hired, say, like there'll be like what we call a grade. So I'm a PhD economist at EPA would start at a grade 11 or grade 12, and there's like a salary band associated with that. And then other places have different grades. And one reason I mention that is because at EPA we actually have two different kinds of economists. You have like a regulatory economist that starts at an 11, and then a research economist that starts at 12. I know USDA also does that. So the reason I mentioned that is because you can actually glean a little bit of information about the job you're applying for and what kind of work you'll be doing based on the grade you're starting. But it's really important to know where you're starting, because I'll talk a little bit about negotiation later, but you can't negotiate pay outside of the pay range HR says you're in. So if HR says you're an 11, you can't get paid more than an 11. HR says you're a 12, you can't get paid more than a 12. So let's see. I just want to, Anastasia mentioned this too, but regarding the timing of offers, so like I said, we try as best we can to match the Joe cycle. Hiring in the federal government can be really slow, and we've certainly lost candidates because we can't keep up. So if you have an offer and you're interested in a government job and you've applied and you're not excluded, please communicate with us. If you have a question about where you are in the cycle, just ask. If you have a flyout or an offer, let us know. And again, if you're not going to take our job, let us know that too. It's extremely costly in the federal government. It's probably costly everywhere to fail a search. You don't want to have to go through that again. You don't have to wait till the next cycle, especially the way our budget, Congress sets our budget every year. We might not have that slot next year. So we really want to get it filled this year. So like once we're dominated, and certainly once you've accepted a job offer, please let us know. So then about negotiation, given that there's so many jobs across the government, it's less important. You can't negotiate a whole lot. So it's really very important for you to understand what job you've accepted or you've been offered through the initial interviews or through the flyouts. Oh, and I guess I should have mentioned that especially in places where they don't have a lot of PhD economists, there may not be a formal flyout stage. It may just be interviews. You may not have like the seminar, and which is a signal, right? In the kind of job you'd be doing. So if you're insistent on doing peer-reviewed research, that's maybe not the best fit. But you need to understand the kind of job you're doing, because most federal economists are doing some mixture of research and policy work. It will vary a lot, across agencies, even within agencies, even within my office. There's a lot of variation, but you can't escape that policy work. So it is important for you to know how much room you're going to have for research and when that research will happen. I think in most places that would hire a PhD, we want you to have a honeymoon to get your job market paper and other essays out to the extent you want to. We work really hard at that. I talked to some friends at like the board, and they do the same thing. Other places it might work a little differently. I've talked to people at Department of Justice and Antitrust. I think they do try to start you up, but then you're assigned to a case. And when you're assigned to an antitrust case, that's what you're doing until it's over. And then you get like a mini sabbatical, a few months where you can work on research, and then it switches back. In my office, if I'm covering like a really big regulation, that's what I'm doing. And then my bosses understand that I have other things I want to do, and I get to maybe do some research later. If USDA, I think when the Farm Bill is coming out, which is a 4 or 5 year thing, that's what people are doing. They're responding to Congress. They're helping draft the legislation, whatever. There's less time for research. So you're not going to negotiate yourself out of that, but it's important to have like a clear understanding with the job you're taking of what the policy requirements are and when that will happen. And then just make sure you have a common understanding before you go in. Let's see. So you can't really negotiate. You can't negotiate your salary. Agreeing with Bart, you definitely can't negotiate your salary. You can't negotiate your salary outside of a certain range, and you definitely can't negotiate it much if you don't have another offer. You can negotiate how long you have to start your research honeymoon. There's not a lot of research support, especially given our budgets. We don't, there's research support, but it's not something you can allocate ahead of time generally, because we don't always know year to year what we're going to have. We don't have a lot of RAs, and we share them, but everyone's pretty nice. And I would ask what the policy on details and fellows. One of the great things about working in the federal government is all the other really interesting federal government jobs there are. You might be familiar with every year I feel like I see on Twitter, people starting a year coming from academia to the Council of Economic Advisors or something like that. And people from my office have gone to the Council of Economic Advisors, the Council on Environmental Quality. The EPA actually has an agreement with the State Department, and other science agencies do too, to send fellows to embassies. They almost never want economists. They always, want someone to run a wastewater treatment plant or something like that. But I still look every year, in case I could do that. The Office of Evaluation Services, so the evidence team in the government, has a one-year fellowship. I covet that. I want to do that some year. And even within the agency, I'm about to start a detail in another office. So there's a lot of opportunities to even move around within our agency. So that's the kind of thing you should get a handle on. And then again, one nice thing about the government is there is a lot of flexibility about schedules, remote work, telework. So getting an agreement on that, understanding your options on that ahead of time is really useful. So I don't have so I talked about timing, multiple offers. Again, just let us know what you're seeing, and we'll do the best we can, but we can't always. We try not to make exploding offers, especially given how long the hiring process in the federal government can take. It doesn't really seem fair. Although I guess I should have said this when I first started talking about USA jobs. At EPA, at least, economists are now a STEM field. So we have direct hire authority. So it's made it much easier for us to hire economists than it used to be. A lot of jobs in the government, you have to answer all these questions about your experience and provide a long resume that supports that. And then people in HR who don't really understand your job sort of score you, and then they rank like the top 10 people and send that back. And then you wonder what they did. But now with direct hire authority, it's much easier for us to hire economists. So that's good news for everybody out there. And negotiation, like I've said, there's not a whole lot you can negotiate. But we'll do our best, especially if you have another offer and you're really interested. But I think that's all the points I definitely wanted to hit. And I know, Bart and Anastasia gave a lot of really great advice. So I'd like to turn it over to Chris, and I am happy to answer any questions going forward.
Great, thank you, Will. So I'll start talking about how timing of offers works within the industry sector. I will caveat this though and say my own experience was a little bit unique. So I actually did not go through typical PhD recruiting. I started working while I was still doing my PhD. Not sure I'd recommend that for you all, but for a number of reasons, including strong geographic preference at the time to stay in San Diego, that's what I decided to do. So just take some of the timing comments here maybe with a little bit of a grain of salt, because they're what I experienced personally and maybe not reflective of what you will find if you go through the more standard process. Typically, what I see from companies is that once you get an offer, the timing to respond is pretty short. In my experience, it's always been about 2 weeks. Although I would say that can always be flexed. There's nothing really it's basically what they do to try to get you to commit sooner. If you have other processes you're in, if you have other offers, there's at that point a lot of flexibility within the timing. After you get an offer, also the other thing you should be aware of is that's when company will typically set up a sell call with you. So that usually is with kind of a hiring manager. It might also there might be another one that happens with HR or the recruiter, where they take you through, why they think this is a good place for you, what the benefits are, all of that. I'll go through a little bit more details about what to ask there, but typically the process in terms of timing is you get the offer, and then a day or two later you'll have that sell call with them. So I brought up multiple offers already, and I think I want to actually dig into this a little bit more because there's a lot that's maybe different here than what folks have mentioned on the academic and government sides. So obviously you want to have multiple offers. I think that's, more the merrier. They're always a good thing. And I would say maybe slightly different to what Bart was saying about bidding wars. I have definitely seen bidding wars on the industry side, especially last year when everybody was just, in tech trying to hire like crazy. I saw a lot of kind of multiple rounds happening with folks. That said, I think maybe two things there. Like one is like companies, if you have multiple offers, companies will basically know that if they raise your offer, the other companies are also going to raise their offers. So sometimes what we did find is like HR would just proactively kind of max things out in order not to have these multiple rounds, because they are costly as they are kind of, Bart was talking about going back to the dean multiple times, maybe not as costly as like in the case where you're going back to HR multiple times, but still there's a cost incurred there and there's time wasted. So sometimes companies will actually, instead of kind of just matching what other offer you have, they'll actually proactively beat that offer quite aggressively if they really want you, just to also kind of head off this back and forth process. The other thing I would say about, what's maybe different now versus what I saw last year is, the market has shifted a lot. So you definitely want to also read the market and how you're approaching all of this. Last year, like I mentioned, I saw a lot of bidding wars, and I think that was reflective of every tech company was trying to hire people, and it was definitely a candidate's market. That's definitely changed. I would say, right now, a lot of tech companies are seeing layoffs, a lot have hiring freezes. So I think the position that candidates are in is very different. I don't know how that's actually going to translate to how, multiple offers are dealt with, but just something to be aware of that, we're not in the same environment that we were in a year ago. Similar to what other folks said about, when you have multiple offers, I think it's really good to be very transparent and very honest. I would also say that even applies earlier than when you have offers. When you're actually going through the interview process, it's really beneficial to be as transparent as possible with what stage you're in with other companies or other people that you're talking to. And the reason I say that is you don't want to end up in a situation, because again, the offer acceptance windows can be kind of short. So you don't want to end up in a situation where you have to make a decision on an offer and you're maybe in an early stage with another company and they can't get you through the interview process in time, or maybe that process would have to be rushed in a way that wouldn't be advantageous to you. So I think being very open about where you are in the process and who you're talking to is really in your interest, and also to try to manage things so that your processes to some extent are happening within a similar timing. So again, you're not going through your HR screen with one company when you're past your final round with another. And I found most places are good as long as you're being transparent about like trying to keep that, like adjusting your schedule to account for the fact that you're in other processes. Also, just on the like how you handle the fact that you have other offers once you're actually making your decision and trying to negotiate. I would say that some companies will kind of ask you what you need. I think this is to, Bart was saying like you should kind of say, okay, I need, X more in salary or whatever it is that you're requiring. I think the difference on the industry side is I wouldn't recommend proactively offering that unless a company is absolutely saying like they need to know, what your, minimum salary is or how much they have to beat for you to take their offer. So I would not proactively recommend, at least on the industry side, saying kind of what you need. Let them see the other offer and decide, how they want to respond. And then you can push after they respond to that. But I wouldn't proactively offer it again, because what I found in practice is anytime you offer anything, like they just come in lower. So, better to let them basically make that, basically let them, craft their response, and then you can see what you want to do with that. In most cases, though, places will just kind of take the other offer details and they'll send it to their comp team, and then they'll basically decide what they want to respond with. So I think it's becoming more common that they won't even ask you what you need. They'll just kind of ask, can you send over the details of the other offer? In terms of what can be negotiated, so I'll just go through the different items here. Salary is a really interesting one right now in companies. I think this is one where historically there's been a lot of salary negotiation. That's kind of been the main thing that people have negotiated. The big change I've seen within tech recently has been that companies now, because of the emphasis on equity and inclusion, have actually moved to having salaries be fixed and just the same across everybody getting offers at a certain level. So I have seen at some of the big tech companies actually not having room to negotiate salary at all, because they just want to have that be the same across everybody. So that's been, I think, a very big change. I'm not saying though that that's every company. So you should get a sense of like, is that happening at the company that you're talking to or not? Which is useful because then you kind of know what the parameters are that you can play with. Where the salaries are not fixed, there typically are bands that do exist. And so I think just like Will was saying at the EPA, like if you're coming in at a certain level, there will be a salary range. And it will be hard for a company to go above that band. I believe you might want to look into this. I believe in some states now, like California, companies actually have to reveal the bands. So it's something also to check, because I know the regulations have been shifting a lot there, and you may actually be able to get more information now than you were able to get in the past. I think that's a relatively recent change that's happened as far as the salary band law. Sign-on bonuses are another item. I think this is one where there's maybe a lot of flexibility. So I think the difference being here that when a company is negotiating salary, this is something that is now impacting how, let's say, stock analysts look at their stock price, because this is their kind of recurring fixed cost of personnel. Sign-on bonuses are more of a one-time thing. So I think there's a lot more flexibility there, because it's just not going into like, this is now a recurring cost for this person that's hitting every year. So I've seen much more flexibility on that item. Obviously, stock compensation is a very big one at a lot of tech companies. So even though with this push towards kind of having everybody, paid equally, they fixed the salaries, I haven't found that they fixed the stock. So I think there's a lot more negotiating room in terms of the stock that you're getting. I think you can negotiate on the amount, but you really can't do much in terms of the vesting schedule. So different companies will have different vesting schedules. Uber tends to be quite front-loaded. I think Amazon is quite, biased towards you getting more of your stock in like years 3 and 4. Something to definitely pay attention to, because that number can seem like a pretty big one, because you're basically shown like, here's your stock that you're getting for 4 years, all as in one lump sum on your offer. But you do want to dig into the details and really understand, like, when are you going to get that? Do you have to hang around for 4 years to get the majority of that, like you do at some places? Or like I said, Uber's accelerated. Facebook, I think, was quite similar with that. Are you going to get a lot of that sooner, where you can really think about it as almost effectively like salary? Because some places are actually vesting monthly, and this money is coming in is a very similar way that salary would. One other thing on stock is you also want to understand, again, this isn't something you can really negotiate, but you do want to understand how refreshes work at the company. So companies that have vesting schedules where you will be, out of your initial stock grant, getting less every year, what they'll typically do is they'll refresh you in subsequent years if the company's stock price comes down. You want to get a good understanding of like, is that happening at that company and how is that working? Because that's really, it could be critical to your compensation once you get into like years 2, 3, and 4. So definitely something to understand. It should be spelled out in your offer, but definitely if you feel like you need more details, then ask the recruiter for more information there. Another item that you can negotiate, I've seen, is your location and also whether or not you can be remote. I think this is a really important one right now because a lot of companies are actually trying to enforce this kind of return to office policy that, like, if you're not remote, then things aren't flexible anymore. They're saying you have to be in, X days, and it might have to be a particular day of the week that you have to be in. So if you are, like, what I would be careful about is that if a company is telling you right now, oh, it's very flexible, and they're saying your offer is going to be based in this location, but you can kind of come in whenever you want to, I wouldn't necessarily trust that, because what we've seen is a lot of companies said that during COVID, and now they're saying, oh, but it's, we want everybody in now because it's so great to work together. We're going to have this policy where now you have to come in. So if you want to be remote and have that flexibility, I think, you want to actually negotiate for remote upfront, if that's something that's absolutely critical to you, because if it's just kind of a verbal thing and it's very vague, then that can change and policies can be implemented that would actually change, what might have been a kind of flexible work from home situation to actually having to come into the office. I think we're seeing that across a lot of tech companies. Uber actually recently did that too. So just, again, something to really watch out for. Also, in terms of things you can negotiate, relocation is one that depends on company. So some companies will have a formula. They'll just look at, okay, where are you now? Where are you moving to? And based on that, they'll give you a certain amount. Other places may actually not even offer relocation proactively, and you have to negotiate how much you get. So you just have to understand how it works at that company, but that's something you want to, at least, I mean, you should get it if you're having to relocate. Whether or not you have to negotiate for it just depends on the company and their policy. Start dates, also something you can typically negotiate. Usually, I would say, companies always want you like yesterday, so they're typically in a hurry to get people. But in practice, there is a good amount of flexibility here, especially if they really want you. Nobody's gonna say like, well, I'm not gonna have this person because they're gonna come a month later. So if you want, for example, to have some time to travel before you start, just negotiate that. And possibly a good idea. I've seen people do that where, after they defend their dissertation and they start working, maybe they want to go, take a month off and do some traveling. And that might be a nice way to have a break and really have yourself be, refreshed before you start your first industry job. Also, title sometimes can be negotiated. That really depends on the company, but I have seen, especially kind of with smaller places, like, actually this was kind of the case at HP, where you can essentially decide what you want your title to be. So some companies have a lot of flexibility. I mean, within reason, you're probably not going to, be the chief economist coming out of your PhD, but a lot of places that are smaller or maybe don't have very formalized processes for economists will give you some flexibility on your title. And that can be advantageous just in terms of, what your title is can then influence in 2 or 3 years when you're now thinking about what's the next step. You have that title on your resume that can influence what kind of positions you're able to look for your next move. And then just one other thing to pay attention to, things like 401k, vacation, insurance, those things I think typically can't be negotiated. So you just want to get a good understanding of, is there a fixed weeks of vacation? A lot of tech companies now have unlimited paid time off. I can talk more about that, how it works in practice, if you'd like. But you just want to understand how those things work. Like Uber doesn't have a 401k, for example, or sorry, doesn't have a 401k match. Very unusual for tech companies. So you just want to look at all those details and make sure you're considering them when you're weighing the different offers. And then in terms of negotiation, I think I already kind of mentioned, like, the biggest thing is just having another offer, exactly the same as what Bart had mentioned on the, how things work in academia. Like, it's hard to negotiate if you don't actually have any kind of, reasonable evidence that you could go somewhere else and somebody else is offering you something more. That said, I have seen some people, especially when you're getting an offer, let's say you're getting an offer early in the process. Like, this happened one time for us with intern hiring. Like, we wanted to have this intern work for us full time, and we wanted to basically have her before this whole job market process happened, just locked in. So we made an offer, and it was obvious that she wasn't going to have competing offers because we were making it very early. And at that point, she actually came back with data and said, well, here's what I think I should be earning based on what I'm seeing in terms of where other companies are paying. So you might be in a position like that where you maybe won't have another offer because you've interned somewhere and they've just made you an offer, or for whatever reason, you're earlier in the process. And in that case, just come with data. I think sites like levels.fyi are really great places where you can get really, actually, I think, detailed data on salaries, stock grants, all of this, and just bring that to the negotiation if you're in that position. I also want to just briefly touch on like the decision process and what you want to consider kind of more broadly outside of just the compensation elements. So obviously, I think like culture fit is really important. You should be thinking about, are these people that you want to work with? Is this a place that would work well in terms of the things that you like to do or how you like to work? So I mentioned earlier the cell call that people will do after you get your offer. That's a really great time to ask questions. So definitely at that point, be prepared to just like, what are all the things that you want to know in terms of, maybe how work-life balance is, what the like performance process looks like, all of that. So definitely come prepared to the cell call with all of the questions and all of the things that you'd like to know. The other thing though is the cell call is, as it's called, a cell call. Like, the company's selling you and they're going to give you a very, rosy picture of how things are there. I would say you should also look at ways that you can find out how things really are from a more objective source. So, obviously really great people to talk to are people that at that company or who used to be there that are not part of your interview recruitment process. Because obviously, there's no incentive on their side to give you a biased view the way that there is if you're talking to, let's say, a recruiter. Also, a lot of places, especially bigger companies, you can find a lot of stuff online about, the company culture, how things really are. So those are also really good sources of information that I think are, let's say, more objective, although I think maybe online will tend to bias more towards the people who are unhappy. So also take that with, a grain of salt, as you would the things that the people who are trying to recruit you will tell you as well. People who are actually at the company or who were there that would probably be your best and most unbiased source of truth for this. And then, things you want to ask about. Really, I think the important thing is you want to know what is the bad thing or the bad things at that particular company. Like, every place that you're going to go to has something about it that is not good. And you want to get an understanding of, like, are those things that would, like, what are they, first of all, that company? Are they things that would bother you or be deal breakers? So I think that is really important. And again, every place has them. You just to kind of figure out what they are. There's no place that is, perfect and has their house completely in order, even amongst the big tech companies. Work-life balance is a big one. I think this varies highly. I've heard at some companies it can be, pretty bad in terms of work-life balance. So you definitely want to figure out, like, in reality, what are people, what kind of hours are people working outside of what it might say in your offer, like what is actually happening. The promo and perf process, also something to really understand. Are they doing like stack ranking where the bottom 10% every year get put, either on a performance improvement plan or are shown to exit? Some companies do things like that. You want to get a sense of, is it kind of that like competitive fear-based culture in terms of the perf process, or does it work differently? And also on promotions, you want to get an understanding of how promotions work. Is it up to the manager? Is it done by committee? That also varies highly depending on the company that you're going into. And also what they're looking for in the promo process. Like, what are the things that you would have to do to actually get to the next level? Those are also good things to understand, and how fast it would happen. That can also vary quite a bit. In terms of what you will be doing kind of day to day, I think those are also really good things to dig into a little bit more when you're talking to people at a company. So like, are you doing deep work and actually getting to do good science, or are you running around fighting fires all day? How are you viewed by, let's say, cross-functional partners? I know it's like some tech companies, scientists are viewed kind of as support. Like, I have a question, I need some data, let me go ask, the data science team or the applied science team to do that. At other places, I would say Uber is a place where we're definitely kind of equal partners in the process of deciding what our product strategy will be, what we're going to do. So you want to get a sense of that, like is science valued at that company, or is it seen kind of as a support function? Because I think that can really impact your work satisfaction, depending on how that is. And then just the last thing maybe to think about is some companies have a lot of flexibility in terms of moving around internally. Like, I think within Uber, this is very much the case where if you're in core analytics and science, like once you've kind of met the bar for that organization, you can shift around, and it's pretty easy to do so. Whereas at other companies, it can be actually very hard. If you decide you want to try something different and learn something new, it can be very hard to make that move. So also something that you might want to ask about. And then just the last thing in terms of like your decision process, I would say if you're finding that something is something logistical is a roadblock, so let's say location, again, be very transparent about that. I think if a company really wants you, like a lot can be done. And I've seen this happen where like there was one person that we had hired at HP. She wanted to be based out of New England, didn't have any offices there, anywhere near there, but it was basically like a deal breaker for her if she couldn't be based there. So we, as an exception, made a remote offer. So again, if a company really wants you and there's something like logistical blocking, then I would just be really upfront and transparent about it. And a lot of things can be like, there's policies, and then if they really want you, there's exceptions to policies. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So maybe wrap up here and we can go to Q&A.
Thanks so much, Chris, and everybody else who presented their suggestions. So we'll now open it up for Q&A. So you can either raise your hand and speak, or you can type your question into the chat, or you can send it directly to me if for whatever reason you don't want your identity to be known. And any questions in the chat, I'll read out loud so that people watching this video can know what the question was. If there are no questions, we can wrap up early. It's up to 45 minutes. I know it can be hard to come up with questions when you haven't been through the offer stage ever yet. And I did think the presentation was quite comprehensive, so maybe we just covered everything. I guess maybe, I'll just throw in a question. This was touched on a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more about like how closely should your advisor be involved in the offer stage beyond giving you their take on it? Do you ever want them to call, for example, a place if they've given you an exploding offer and talk them out of it, or some other, like, what are some scenarios where you think it might be good for people to get their advisor involved?
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I have two thoughts on that. One is, your advisor can often know people at a place, in a way that makes it easier for them to get certain information for you. And so that's definitely a role that can be helpful. That it's if you have an offer, for example, the kind of scenario Anastasia mentioned, where you have an offer at one place and another place hasn't decided, your advisor can maybe try to find out, is there really a hope at this other place or not? And it's much harder for you to find that out. The other thing I would say about advisors, though, and I think it really relates to some of the other things that came up, is I think you have to, especially when it comes to your advisor's recommendations, I think you have to really evaluate things for yourself. I think, your advisor may want you to go to an academic institution, and your heart is really in going to Uber, or vice versa. And and in terms of rankings of departments, your advisor may want you to go to the higher ranked department, even though it's a place that you would not be happy. And so I think you should get good information from your advisor and use them where you can, but not assume that everything, that their recommendation is necessarily what's best for you. You have to evaluate that for yourself.
Yeah, I completely second that. I actually had the same use case in mind, in terms of information acquisition, like all of those peculiarity of different places with different timings, and different kind of procedures. That's something that's really hard to actually find out about as an applicant. And most of the time you don't need to, like at the interview stage, you don't need to know who's going to be making calls when. They're all going to come. But at the offer stage, where you have different deadlines, there can really be helpful to know whether you're not hearing from a school because you're like their fifth choice and it's unlikely they'll hire you, or it just kind of more logistical. And sometimes the signals that you get from the school on that front are still not clear enough. And that's where your advisor may be able to obtain better information.
Yeah, I guess for us, I don't think there's a lot that can be done at the offer stage of the advisor, but they're really helpful with signals. So since most graduate students don't, are probably looking at academia first, we really appreciate signals from the candidate or an advisor, the official one through Joe, that says you're really interested, especially if you're from a department that's higher than we would normally hire from. A signal that they're really interested is very helpful from the advisor.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's a question for Chris. Could you explain more regarding the expected timing of offers?
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the start of my presentation, I went through a different process. I did not go through the kind of official PhD recruiting process. So I don't know if this might be different. But what I have found is that, I guess, first of all, places will generally give you an offer very quickly. Like, I don't think there's a lot of having to, mull things over. At least in my experience, usually within a few days, companies will know if they're going to make an offer or not. And it's typically also because they have, when they're hiring multiple people. So it's not like if they make an offer to one person, they're not going to make it to somebody else, at least the larger companies. So the offers usually happen pretty quickly after your final round. At least, that's what I had seen. And then you usually have about 2 weeks to respond. Again, I don't know if this is different if you're going through like a more formal process. Maybe there's some flexibility there, but I've usually seen those offer timelines be short, at least the timeline to accept the offer. But you can always ask for more time, and especially if you have multiple offers, like that's when you can basically leverage that and use that to ask for for more time to decide. Basically, if let's say you got an offer and then like at the end of the 2-week expiration window, you get another offer coming in, I think it's very reasonable to say, hey, I need another 2 weeks because I just got this other offer that came in. So companies I think are using the short window to just try to get you locked in faster. But it's not like there's nothing on our end that's actually fixed that like it won't work in the HR system or something if you go past that window. Like it's literally somebody needs to just go in and update that number. That's all that needs to happen to extend the offer. So if you want more time, I would say just ask.
Great. Other questions? And I'll also mention that since this is the last session of the last workshop, if you have more general questions beyond the offers, we can take those as well. Okay, well, I will take this as a sign that all of our participants are incredibly well prepared for the job market. Thank you to everybody who participated, especially our speakers, Anastasia, Will, Bart, and Chris. Thank you to all who asked questions, and best of luck out there.